You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima. Good morning, Allison. How are you doing this morning?
Hi, Justin. I'm doing well. It's been an exciting week at our house for our Maya. She just got her first job, and so she's at her second shift right now as a barista at a coffee shop.
That's so exciting.
I know. It's very exciting. Feels very grown up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big thing that's happening. I know that last time we were together, we talked about how Sean had just had an unexpected biopsy done,
Mm-hmm.
and we were waiting for the results. So since then, we've gotten the results, and it's all good, which is great.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yes. So that is very good news. So they're just going to monitor it. But at this point, there is nothing that needs to be done because it all looks fine.
Mm.
So that's good. Another one, another 17 gray hairs added to my head and years off my life. But, you know, we'll take it.
Right.
Yeah. How about you? What's going on over there?
Yeah, we've had kind of a big thing happened yesterday.
Tell me.
So, as I've talked about before, Sarah has for the past 5 years been getting IV fluids.
Yeah.
And for about, I think, roughly maybe 4.5 of those years have been through a central line that she has. And so it's been pretty much 2, sometimes 3 liters of fluids a day for that period of time, which is a lot. That's like thousands of infusions, and that's hours of a day hooked up to a IV pole.
Yeah.
And so that's been a lot.
Yeah.
And, you know, when she started that, she was more or less bedbound and was extremely limited. And for reasons that we don't fully know how this specifically made a difference, it did. And it was one of the things that helped move her forward, and she felt like she had more energy. She was able to be up more. And so it's been huge. And so it's just been this thing we've kept doing. And so it kind of got to the point where we were wondering, okay, she's had this line in for a long time. Does it need to get replaced? At what point do we need to start being concerned about that?
Can you real quick tell for the people, you and I know this medical jargon, but explain to other people where a central line is and what that means?
Yeah. So she has, it's just a short tube with a little connector that comes out of her chest, and it goes underneath her skin up, I think, towards her neck and loops back down. And it basically goes, I think, into her aorta, maybe. It goes a large vein right by the heart. Yep. And so it makes it much easier to put in fluids. Before, initially, she had a little needle on her, arm, and just it took way too long to infuse the fluids. And those just, you can have that in for a couple days, but it's also uncomfortable. And, so it's not a long-term solution. So once it was this is helping, we went with a more, long-term permanent kind of way to do this.
Yeah. But I think it's one of these that we're just oh, central line.
Right.
And it's oh, she's walking around with a thing connected to her heart.
Right.
A line, for 5 years.
And so there's a special dressing around that. That has to have, a nurse comes once a week to change that dressing. We have to be super careful when we're hooking up to it that we take the alcohol pads and wipe it down for 20 seconds and make sure everything is clean and sterile. And because it's with it going right into her heart, there's the infection risk is always there.
And bathing, does she have to put saran wrap?
She's got a shields that she puts over it for showering, which is a pain to do, and they don't always stick as well as they should.
Right.
It's just never been a great situation. So so that's been going on for a long time. We were okay, does this need to get replaced? We talked to her doctor, and it's that's probably a good idea. And then we thought, okay, before we just go forward and swap this out, it's been a long time since she started doing this, and she's doing much better than she was when she started. There's other things that we've started that have also made a difference. Let's make sure that these fluids are still necessary before we do sense. That. And so her doctor seemed on board with that. And so for the past 14 weeks, which is a long time, she's been dropping 1 bag a week,
doing
a very slow taper. And and over the course of that, like there were no like massive drop offs in how she was doing. Like it didn't seem like anything was declining as the fluids tapered off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is great.
Great. Yeah.
And so last night was her final infusion. And she had some friends over and she had cake and they had like they did like a countdown as the final.
Yeah. The final drips.
The final drips went in. Yeah. And so it's this big moment of this, you know, this thing that brought such like progress to her that has helped.
Yeah.
And now she apparently doesn't need it anymore. And she can get this line removed and have hours of her week back and not have the inconvenience of having the tube there.
Right.
And it's a big thing. Yeah.
It's huge. Well, I know you've talked about like when you've been out of town and all of that, like prepping the fluids beforehand and having somebody else come do it because she often couldn't do it herself. And it sounds like it's been a really big part of your day and your caregiving life is these fluids, right? And I would guess, just because we used to have fluids around here as well, is like the ordering of the supplies and the keeping track of it, and you know, all of that is like a whole like part-time job, right?
Right. Yeah. And so some of the fluids she took throughout the week were what they call banana bags. There's probably a more technical term for that. Maybe not. I don't know. They end up being yellow. So the fluid ends up being yellow. But it's like there you've got a syringe and you're pulling some liquid out of some vials and injecting it into the IV bag. And so there's some stuff around that. And so like that was something I always did. And it was, you know, again, that's something where you got to make sure everything is sterile and you're real careful with that whole process. And so as she went down in the fluids, once kind of those were out of the picture, she was like, you know, I want to just take over the rest of this. And so she has been for a number of weeks. I haven't been involved really at all beyond the making sure the right supplies are coming.
Right.
Which has been a little trickier as we're not needing as much every week. It's like, okay, what do we have? What do we need for the next week?
Right.
And all of that. But so it's been like taking up less space in my mind over the last few weeks already before this, like it actually being done.
Yeah. I mean, can we just stop for a second to pause? Because again, this is one of these things that like you and I, we just like, ta-da, here we do this thing. But when you're like, and then I take this vial and I take some things from a vial and then I inject it into a bag that goes straight to her heart and the infection risk is high. Do you know what I mean? Like you are an engineer, right? By training. And you're doing these things that are like really intense medical things that you were not. I mean, as somebody I'm sure trained you along the way, but you know what I mean? Like
there was Sarah filmed the nurse going through it, and that's my training. And then I watched the video. Yeah.
Yep. So I just think this is the kind of thing that we just are like used to doing and don't realize like, whoa, vials and injections and tubes and is part of our caregiving life.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Like, that's a big deal. So how are you? So she had a party, right? She's celebrating.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
Yeah, that's been a little bit, I think, interesting because over the last few weeks, it hasn't felt like she's been getting more and more excited as like the end is coming and like very celebratory, and rightfully so. Like this is a huge thing.
Yep.
And for me, I just wasn't feeling that way as much. And it took some kind of sitting with it to kind of figure out, you know, why that was. And I think that some part of this thing ending like brings up this like I guess grief. There's some grief there. There's feelings of loss. There's like recognizing like how sick she was that she required this kind of intervention, and like realizing like how wild it is that we were doing this we've been doing this for 5 years. And you know, just in general, the like what her being sick has meant as far as things we couldn't do with our lives. And like just a lot of those kind of emotions to kind of sit and process. And as I kind of been thinking about that, I think that there can be, you know, there's probably a lot of reasons why those feelings come up towards the end of something or at the end of something like this. But when you are doing it, you're in the middle of it. It's like, this is what we've been doing for years. There's no like nothing telling you that you won't be doing this for years to come.
Right.
And you're just kind of like in it and doing it, and your head's down and you're just kind of plodding forward. It feels too like impractical to imagine a future where that's not part of it, sort of.
Yeah.
And so like when it is like, oh, this is ending.
Yeah.
You start to like, oh, this is like, imagine and see what life will be like without this thing in it every day.
Right.
And you see that like the spaciousness there, or the like lack of the mental load that's removed from you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's that contrast between, which I think brings more clarity to how intense or like stressful or just like whatever things were.
Yeah.
And it's that there's like this inflection point or something where you just see more clearly what you have been living through.
For sure.
And so that's been, just trying to not rush past that to the celebratoriness for me, while also certainly supporting Sarah and in her joy around this, like not like, no, you can't feel that way yet because I'm maybe not there. And she's been, we've talked about it, and she's been really supportive of that.
Sure.
But yeah, it's been interesting, kind of that being out of sync a little bit on that.
Yeah. Oh man, so many things I want to say. First of all, 10 million points to you, because you sort of like noticed there's some feelings happening here. And you said you like sort of stopped and sat with them and are thinking about, you know what I mean? And so we've talked so much about like putting the feelings in a Tupperware, or like also on the other side, like who's in my boardroom today. And so just like 10 million points to you for like noticing it. And instead of just being like, goodbye, I don't want to feel you, being like, oh, hey there, buddies. What's going on? Who are you? What do you need? So like, well done.
Thank you.
Yes. And 10 million extra points. You gotta cash these in someday.
Yeah, I do.
Or not getting sucked in sounds weird, but like swept away maybe by the celebration, and by holding your own in that moment to say like, yes, I see that you want to celebrate, and I'm not ready for that. And so I'm going to celebrate with you, and I'm going to feel this. And I think it just goes to show like what a healthy relationship you two have, that you can say that to her, and that she's like, yep, I get that. I think about like, there's a couple different things about like these feelings are coming up. And I think one of them, like you said, is like when it ends, now you can see this contrast. Like, like I think it's hours and hours a week that you spent on this. And so now that you're on the other side, you're able to like sort of look back and see that difference. I think that's one piece. I think the other piece is potentially like what happened in my situation is where once I quit the big job and then I had more time.
Right.
So you even said like, as Sarah has taken this on, you've had more spaciousness, you said.
Right.
And I think that spaciousness allows for the feelings that have been in the Tupperware to be like, ta-da, there's room now. Right. So then they're like, I'm coming out. And so I think it's maybe a double for you. It's like both things are happening at the same time.
Right.
That you're ending it and that you have more spaciousness. And so then you've got these feelings are kind of showing up. What I'm wondering is, I mean, it's beautiful that Sarah's like, yep, you don't have to celebrate. It's fine. I'll celebrate. You take your time.
Yeah.
Most of the time the world is not like that. Right.
Yeah.
So you said she had a party last night with her friends, and like, what about if the world around you is like, buck up, little camper. Like, what's your problem? Like, isn't this so great? Like, why aren't you celebrating? Right. Like, how does that feel, or what is that like for you when you're like, I'm not there, but the world expects me to be there? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think I will say that, like, I think starting to feel this like multiple weeks ago, as Sarah kind of took the infusions over and I was already getting more space in the day. I think that helped me kind of work through that somewhat before the final like celebratory last infusion, to where I'm closer to that, like, this is a really fantastic celebratory thing now than had I been managing them up to the end, I think.
Okay.
So I will say that. But I don't feel this, I haven't felt this pressure to be feeling different than I have.
Okay.
And so I don't know why. It doesn't feel like, I don't know. It hasn't felt like this like thing that I've widely publicized as like this thing is happening to where everyone is coming at me. Oh, this thing is ending, and that's so great, and it's so wonderful. She doesn't need that anymore.
That might be the difference.
That could be some of the difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if like, we just had this biopsy result, right? So like I mentioned, like, so same thing, people were with us in the waiting.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the results came back and they were positive, everybody's like, woohoo.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Fantastic. Wonderful news. And you can almost feel them being like, yay, high five, exhale, moving on. Like, and so a couple things that feels from where I sit is like, well, I just like, it's not that fast for me. Right. Like we just had to like hold our breath for a week.
Yeah.
Wondering like which path we're about to take, because if that phone call had been different, our life would have been about to go down a very different path. And so it's not that easy when you've just gone through this hard thing of like doing something for the years like you have, or waiting for results, to just suddenly just switch it off and be like, good news. Great.
Right.
Because that's when you begin to process, right? Is like, oh man, this hard thing I haven't breathed in a week. Like I have been, and so it feels really hard to, when everyone else is just like, celebrate, great news, move on. And also I feel like that's the moment when the support disappears. So I feel like in the waiting week or in the hard times, I think this also can happen for people like, oh, they're done with their transplant. Oh, they are in remission. Oh, they whatever.
Right.
In the middle of it, I think people are supportive and are like, well, of course you feel sad. Of course you feel this. I'm going to bring you a lasagna. Right. After, people are like, well, you should be great. You should be fine. Why aren't you happy? You made it through the thing. And sometimes that can feel, I don't want to say harder because I don't want to, compare, but that can feel hard in its own new special way, because that's when we're finally able to process and sort of feel the feelings that when we were in it, we were just in go mode.
Right.
And we couldn't feel the feelings. It's over, quote, I'm putting air quotes. And then we are able to feel the feelings, and our supporters have moved on.
Right.
And want us to be happy. And there's that disconnect, and I can feel, and then you feel guilty because you're like, should be happy, but you don't feel happy. And then all the feelings just piling up. Yeah.
So unfortunately, you've gone through this like
so many times.
So many times. Far too many times. Do you feel like it is like, do you still feel the same extent of that support moving on, or the people like not getting it? Or do you feel like over time, and I imagine this would have to come from you educating, which is another role that as a caregiver, it's unfortunate that it's another hat we have to wear. Like, do you feel like that's shifted at all, or do you still feel the same kind of way? Yeah.
So, the very first thing that happened with Sean is he had his bone marrow transplant. And with Fanconi anemia, it causes bone marrow failure, which the transplant fixes if it goes well, and the cancer.
Right.
So because he had the bone marrow transplant first, when that had successfully happened, we had a lot of people in our lives who were just like, cured, he's cured. And first of all, like the bone marrow transplant itself, it just like messes up everything in so many ways. So even if that was the only thing that had happened, there's so many fallout pieces from having a bone marrow transplant. But also we had to do a lot of educating at that moment to be like, it cured part of his disease, but not other parts. And so people kept being like, you're over the mountain, you're over all the analogies. And we were like, no. And so you're right. We had to do the educating at that point, which was tough because people like they want to celebrate with you. Yeah. And so when you have to be Debbie Downer and be like, actually it's not, people are like, I don't know what to say about that, So there's been that piece, but then the other piece has been this cancer thing, right? So even like a couple months ago when he had this, like his he had an endoscopy and the doctor was like, all looks clear. See you in a year. People were like, yes, you don't have to go to the doctor in a year. And I was like, no, we have to go to that doctor in a year for a year. That's just one of many doctors. And so I think our community is better than most because of the education that we've done. And actually, Sean, if people are out there are not following Sean, they should, because he's just like a mystic and writes so beautifully. So he wrote a really beautiful post after this last one. It was basically like, yes, it's good news. And every time this happens, it takes a chunk of me out.
Right.
Like literally, but like she's talking more like emotionally. And the just sort of the damage and the impact that every one of these has on him. And so I think that has actually opened people's eyes, this last post. In fact, I saw someone the other day who said, I knew his mom had breast cancer. And I said, how's your mom doing? And he said, you know, she's in remission. He said, but every time I call her, I say like, oh, I have a headache today, Mom. And she's like, that reminds me of when I had chemo and I had headaches. He's like, she always brings up her cancer every time I talk to her. And he's like, I'm so frustrated because I feel like it's out of her body, but now it's taken over her mind. And he said, but when I read Sean's post the other day, it changed my perspective. He said, and it's going to give me a little bit more patience and a little more empathy. He said, because I've been getting so frustrated that like, why is she not moving on? Like, it's over now. Like, it's out of her body. And so I think as a society, we need to realize that like, it's at the end, like cancer, you're never like, I mean, your body can be cancer free, but then that's when you start to process, and that's when you start to feel all the things. And you're always living with that. Is it going to come back? And then you're living with the like, what just happened to me? You know? And I think that we don't realize that enough. I think we're just like too cut and dried with like the 35 treatments are over. You rang the bell. You're done. I gave you a cake. I'm out. And you should be happy. We're happy. Everyone's happy. Goodbye. And I think it can lead to people feeling really abandoned and unseen in that time that can feel really hard. And then guilty because they should be feeling, you know, all the things.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because it's like, as you mentioned, it's like you've been running on like adrenaline, or, you know, for us, it hasn't been in 5 years of adrenaline, but it's just been like, it becomes ingrained as part of your life. And it's just like, you're just moving forward, keeping your head down, doing the thing. And so like, when you're finally past that point, or you're in that space where that weight isn't on you, or the adrenaline fades, or whatever it is, that then opens up the space to like, you feel all the things that you've been, I don't want to say avoiding but like that you haven't had space to. And maybe it is for whatever reasons, like there's survival instincts that keep us going, that like, okay, we can't feel that yet because we got to keep moving. We got to get through this.
For sure. And
that all fades away. And you get that freight train of emotion sometimes that's like, or just you feel exhausted and you're like, and it can feel out of sync when everyone is like celebrating, and you're just like, what is wrong with me? Which is nothing is wrong with you. It's completely understandable the way you're feeling. At the end of these kinds of things,
it's like an emotional hangover.
For sure. Yeah.
You know, of like, whoa, what just happened? And oh man, that's just been a lot. And so I think another piece of this is that this happens with our loved ones as well. So as a caregiver, so like the patient might also be experiencing this. So the patient might be, quote, done with the thing. Now they're starting to process it. So now as caregivers, we're also emotionally supporting our person as they go through this, which is less clear cut. Right. I think that being an emotional and a mental health caregiver is a bazillion times harder than a physical caregiver, because it's one thing if you're like, oh, now I'm going to put the IV in the thing, right? That's pretty clear cut.
It's tangible.
It's tangible. Exactly. Thank you. But if your person's, you know, struggling emotionally, which makes perfect sense, and mentally, because now they're starting to process this thing. Now we as caregivers have this extra thing that we're trying to take care of them about, which there are no guidelines for.
Yeah. And
so go ahead.
I was just going to say, if it's like our situations where it is our spouse that we're caring for, like that's the person that we're normally like,
leaning on,
you know, leaning on and helping us get through stuff. And it brings in that, like, those feelings of like, well, I don't I'm supporting them through this, so I feel like I can't then tell them how this is making me feel.
Yep.
And so making sure that you have another circle that you can move outward with how you're feeling about that, and just kind of brings in those dynamics that sometimes feel complicated.
Yep. I've heard about bone marrow transplant, and I think that with a lot of other things as well, but I think especially with something like that where you're in the hospital for a long time and it feels really hard, but then you go home and everyone's like, ta-da, you're home. But then the role of the caregiver gets so much harder.
Yeah.
So what I've heard about that is that, and I experienced this myself, is that sometimes then that's when the patient can start to process, because they're at home and they're like out of the, day to day, like beeping hospital.
Yeah.
So they can start to process, but the caregiver now, their job is even harder.
Right. They're doing all the things the nurses were doing. Yeah.
Exactly. So they aren't able to process.
Yeah.
Because their caregiving job just got more heightened. And so then their processing gets just like pushed off and pushed off and pushed off. And sometimes it's like, doesn't ever happen. You know what I mean? Depending on like,
not good.
That's not good either, because then it comes out sideways, as we all know. And so I think there's just all these layers of the processing. And so I think, I don't know the answer to this, but I think it's like, how do we, I mean, you modeled this for us beautifully today by saying, I started to feel some feelings and I stopped and I thought about them and I like was curious about them and I've been processing, you know what I mean? Because I think when we've been in go mode, it can feel actually kind of great because we can be sort of numb.
Yeah.
And, speaking from experience where like I was in go mode for like 11 years and then suddenly I took a break and then all the feelings came in. I was like, oh, this feels terrible, And I remember at one point, even sort of, this is a weird thing to say, but I bet y'all will get it. I even thought like, I kind of hope some kind of emergency happens because that will shift me back into go mode where I won't be feeling these things.
Right.
And so I was like wishing for an emergency because things were so calm that I was feeling the things.
Yeah.
And so I think one thing is like to notice, like you said, to like what are those little moments when we can start to be like, oh, there's a feeling. What's that? And not just be like, shove it down.
Right.
But to think about it and to sit with it and to process it and to let ourselves sit with the rub between the difference between, even if we're feeling something that's really different than what the community is telling us we should be feeling, that it is okay.
Right.
So like we said a different time, like all feelings are welcome. And we don't have to be excited and celebrating or we can celebrate it on one hand and be grieving on the other. Like we can hold both. Yep. Yes, exactly. But to sort of like, it's back to the boardroom to think about like, oh, I'm feeling something, and to go into your boardroom in your mind to be like, who's here today? I've been using lately, like, okay, the mic's open. Who's here? Who wants to speak? It's like, oh, hey there, Worry. What's up? Come up to the mic. Yep. What do you have to say? How can we help you today? So if that is a process that helps you listeners to think about like, what is that feeling? Who are they? What do they need?
Yeah. So again, as someone who has gone through this cycle a lot and you get the thing is over, the celebratory high fives, or, that's great news from people. What do you wish that you would hear from them instead? Or what additionally maybe do you wish that they would include? Yeah.
I think that you, again, are a beautiful model of this. So like when we get good news, like I often get like a message from you that will say something like, I saw your good news. I'm really happy for you and Sean. And I want to acknowledge what you've both just been through. And that getting the good news doesn't make what you've just been through go away. So thank you for being a beautiful model of that. So I think words just like that. Like I would want people to hold the yes and. I don't want them to just, because maybe I am feeling really celebratory about it, right? So I don't want them just to jump to the like, oh, but now are you processing and sad? Right?
Right.
I want them to say like, this is good news. I'm glad to hear your good news. And I imagine that waiting for that good news took a toll on you. I'm going to bring you dinner this week or whatever. Right. You know what I mean? Or just like, I see you and I imagine that you might be feeling multiple things.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I would wish for in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend whose child has Fanconi anemia and just finished a transplant. And so had this happen that somebody came up and said, "We're so excited. He's cured." And the mom was like, "Well."
Yeah.
And so as she sort of like described, the other mom was like, "Oh, okay, bye. Like, I don't know what to do here."
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked about like, would it be helpful to say, like, "Thank you for celebrating with me. It is a big deal." Because it is.
Yeah. Right.
And as caregivers, we got to take the good news where we can get it, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for celebrating with me. And I just want to let you know that in addition to this hurdle that he got through, we have other ones ahead, so that people can see that it's a yes and,
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything do you have something that you would wish that people would say to you,
Yeah, that's a good question, because like I haven't had the same exposure to the to this kind of cycle as much, but what I do find is when I'm telling people that this is happening, I always feel like I have to add the caveat that this doesn't mean that she's cured or she's still sick and she's still limited in what she can do. And I guess I wish I didn't have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Or that I wish I didn't have to feel that I have to do that. And I don't necessarily know what it would take. I don't know that it's something that I'm not getting from other people that's making me say that. I think it's more I'm projecting that could be the reaction from people, and I'm heading it off.
Yeah.
Like I'm kind of, I guess maybe in a way I am trying to avoid that pure celebratory response coming back from people.
Mm-hmm.
And protecting myself from that dissonance that I don't want to face in some way, that it's I'm like, yes, this great thing happened and this. And so there's that. So as this thing is happening and we're moving into a new phase, I guess I would want people to acknowledge that these last years have been a lot for you guys both to deal with.
Yeah.
And we're really excited that Sarah is in a place that she no longer needs these fluids. But we also know that, she's still sick and she's not well now. And that, there very well could come a time that we have to go back to these fluids.
Right.
That's another, which is probably another thing to get into, but it's we don't fully understand by what mechanism these fluids helped.
Right.
And so when we don't fully understand that piece, so we can't really know why taking them away right now is okay.
Right.
And with that, so much mystery in that, it's that is kind of looming out there. If whatever we don't understand, what's to say, we can't point to this thing was fixed and so we don't need this anymore.
Right.
And so there's complicated emotions around it.
For sure.
And just it's mostly just acknowledgement that this isn't a single emotion situation, I think, is kind of the big thing, that there's a lot of things to hold as we go through this.
Something that just struck me is that I wonder how much of it is that we are protecting ourselves. If we go all in and celebrating, if you are just yes, ta-da, we're done. And then in 6 months, she has whatever. And then the doctor's like, what, I really think she should go back on those fluids.
Right.
You know what I mean? Are we protecting ourselves by not celebrating in some way? Because we live in such precarious lives, you and I, that it's like a defense mechanism to be
it feels dangerous to celebrate too much.
Yeah. Think about that sentence. It feels dangerous to celebrate too much. Wowza.
Yeah.
That's a layer I had not thought about until now. And I think that I don't think that that's the only thing. I think all the other things we've been talking about are absolutely legit. But I do think this is a big part.
That's another piece.
If I'm woohoo, biopsy's clear, and then a week later they're new spot, I'm cool, okay. You know what I mean? It's just
some serious emotional whiplash.
Yes. And maybe it's just easier to just sort of stay
And it's not that we want
Yeah.
to be like pessimistic or
Right.
whatever. I mean, some of these are legitimate, probably like coping mechanisms as we
For
deal with
sure.
really hard stuff.
Yes. Well, it's realistic. Like, we're being
Yeah, right.
realistic.
Mm-hmm.
That at least in my case, we know this was not the last biopsy.
Yeah, right.
We know that's the case. And so, it's not that I shouldn't celebrate this one.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just this was one of many, many, many. And so I think we're trying to like protect ourselves, and which is kind of sad. And I wish that there was a way, and I hope that there are times that we can exhale and we can celebrate, because there are things to celebrate, I don't know. Like, do you feel like you could ever just like, whew, yes, celebrate, we're done, or I don't know.
I don't know. I think something you said about us having to be realistic.
Yeah.
I think if we felt like the people around us maybe expressed that realism more, we wouldn't feel as much like we have to be so proactive in setting those expectations.
Yes. Yes.
And I think if we didn't feel like we always had to be in that position in that role as like setting the expectations that go along with whatever this news is.
Yep.
I think we might feel like we have more space to let loose a little bit and celebrate a win.
Yes. So well said. Yes.
Because I do think it's important we don't get a lot of wins.
Yeah. Right.
And I think about, you've got your bell that you ring when you get a win, like to celebrate those things. And we can celebrate something while also understanding it doesn't mean everything's over and we're through every hardship.
Yeah.
But like for you to get through a scan or biopsy cycle and come out of that with clear results, like that's a win.
Right.
And you went through a lot, but like, I think for us to also let ourselves feel those positive emotions and exist in that space too, because I think that for reasons we've talked about, we're afraid to, or we're trying to protect ourselves from things. And I just think that we should be able to kind of have that greater range of emotions that we can feel.
That's brilliant what you just said, because I think you're exactly right. Like when I'm with you or my mom or some of our closest friends, like for sure, I feel like, yes, like I could celebrate more openly, because I know that you all see the other side of the coin.
Right.
And I think it's more in like a social media realm or with other sort of like further out in the rings sort of people that's where I feel more guarded.
Right.
Because those are the folks that I feel like I am nervous they're going to come back with just like a praise the Lord, it's all good, moving on, clappy hands, ta-da, right?
Right.
So that's where I feel like I have to be more guarded. But you're right that I do feel like I have people, and you included, that are sort of my safe zone, because I know you get both. And so I can just be like, yes, good news, great. And I don't have to say the thing, because they know it.
Yeah.
They know it in the back of their mind. And so, that's really interesting. I'm thinking too about celebrating like you or me, like you, the what you have done in this role as a infusion nurse, essentially.
Yeah.
Right. For 5 years. And Sarah told me the other day that it's what she calculated, it was like 16 hours a week have been dedicated to these fluids, right?
Yeah.
For 5 years.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like I wish you could, both of you certainly, but we're on the caregiver side. Like, I wish you could get a little medal. Like, I wish there's like a recognition too of like, not just like, that must have been really hard, you went through it, but like, dude, you did this. You're amazing. Yeah. You know what I mean? And not just like, this was hard, but like, you're amazing that you like managed the meds and did the things and set up the nurse visits and infused and learned this new technique from a video. Like a celebration of you and what you did.
Yeah.
Beyond just like, that sounds hard. Right. Like, that's a thing I feel like is missing. Like I wish people would like pump us up and be like, look at you scheduled that appointment. You went and you sat there and watched him get sliced open.
Yeah.
Doesn't quite have the same ring as the other one, but you know what I mean? Like almost like I don't know if hyping up is the right word, but like not just being like empathetic about how hard it is, but like celebrating what we did.
Right.
That makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah. And that I think goes a long way, or would go a long way. I mean, it did, hearing you say it, feeling validated and feeling like seen and in what we have, what our experience has been, and feeling that, just getting that acknowledgement, that recognition that we're doing a thing that's really challenging. We're doing a thing that's really difficult day in and day out. And like so much of the time, everyone's attention is on the ups and downs of the person we're caring for.
Right.
And we don't get that. Like, you've been doing an amazing job at this thing for a long time, for a decade. And like, I think that's incredible.
Right.
To hear that, that's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I almost want you to, and if this is not helpful to you, ignore that I say this, but I almost want you to like write down, like, every week I schedule the nursing visits, order the supplies, organize the things, infuse the, you know, like, boom. And to be like, I did this for 5 years. So even if nobody else hypes you up, for you to just like look at it and be like, look at me with my engineer training, doing all this nursing stuff super well, keeping her alive.
And there was never an infection scare.
Right.
There was never, like, it's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, you know, it's just to have that little moment of like celebrating you, not just celebrating the end of it, but celebrating like what you went through, you know? Yeah.
That's a great perspective to have.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think like what would be the flip side of it, you know, like even for me, for like the biopsy one, you know, like it could be like, you made that appointment. You drove him there. You rescheduled everything to get you both there. You advocated when they you know what I mean? Like, so seeing it not just like, oh, so today I made the appointment but to be like, whoa, today I did all these things. I'm pretty amazing. Yeah. You know? I don't know. I think we got to hype each other up.
I think so. So that's, find that person in your life that you can, hype each other up in that way. Yeah. Feel that appreciation and support or whatever for what the amazing thing that you've been doing that has fallen on your lap that maybe you didn't expect or necessarily ask for or whatever.
And you're not getting paid for and you aren't trained for. And and if you don't have hype people in your life, we will be your hype people.
Yeah.
So you can send us a message and be like, you know what I did today? This and this and this. It just feels like a whole different tone to me to be like, instead of like, oh, I did all these things today, to be like, I'm awesome. I did all these things today, you know?
Yeah. And it's another one of those things where you can go through that process and be like, yes. And and that can be true that you are awesome for doing all those things. And if you also don't feel that way in the moment, like that's, totally. Again, it's a place where you can hold multiple things at once. Like you are awesome for what all of the things you are doing to keep this ball rolling. And you don't always have to feel that way. And that's 100% okay.
For sure. For sure. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think we sort of talked to supporters in the middle, right? So
a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So supporters, I think just to pay attention to your responses. So I think that when you see that somebody has good news, celebrate and acknowledge. Celebrate that the thing happened and acknowledge that like to get there was was hard and that the person might be tired. Yeah. I think to remember to continue support.
Yes.
So if it's like a week or 2 or 3 after the thing happened, to still be like, hey, I'd like to bring you dinner. And to not just pretend that like the bell was rung and therefore everybody's fine, you know?
Right.
And to do some of this hyping up that we just talked about.
Yeah.
You know, like, you're amazing. You did what? That's amazing that you did that. Wow. So, so steal all these comments.
Yes. Good. Yeah, that was a great conversation about a lot of those a lot of that stuff. Thanks for having that.
I had a lot of ahas today.
Yeah. So another thing that is happening right now is November is National Family Caregiver Month or National Caregiver Month.
Family carers, yep.
And so we want to, as we've done in the past, take a chance to offer something to one of you as a way of appreciating you and all that you do and helping you feel supported and seen. So what we'd like to do is do another giveaway for, I think, either one of your caregiver gift boxes or a coaching session. Is that right? So
the winner can choose what you would like. A box or a coaching session.
Lovely.
Yeah. And if you're a supporter and you're listening and you want to, you can enter. And then if you win, you could, let the person that you want to give it to decide if they would like a box or a coaching session. Yeah. So I think we're going to create a form, and the form will be in the show notes and then also in the, on our link tree on our Instagram page. So either of those places you can enter yourself, or you can nominate a caregiver, or you can enter yourself and then gift it to a caregiver. And we will choose a winner at the end of November.
Yeah.
So happy National Family Caregivers Month. Yeah. I'm glad that this exists. I mean, it's not enough, but it's something.
Right. It's something.
It's something. We'll take it. We'll take it. Oh, thank you for talking. I feel like that was like an excavation that we just did. Like we just kind of kept getting deeper and deeper into this. So that was a really cool conversation. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Sounds great.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.